Well, the pointers aren't working. I actually really like this. Well, except parts I don't, but that's okay. So, nice to be back in this part of Kentucky. Haven't been here for a while. Enjoyed my drive out from Lexington and getting to see what's going on. I do think we should thank all the agents that worked to put this on. I know our cooks and everybody that came together. It's always a treat for me to get to work with county agents, and I do like coming out to Western Kentucky, and so then also thank you to you for coming. This is a hard one to think about how to hit the target. So it's easy for Dr. Witt because he can find the target. He just goes out there and he finds that little buttercup. Granted, you got to be on your hands and knees, but you can find it, and then you just whack it with some 2,4-D. It's pretty simple. Dr. Teutsch just looks out. There's bare ground, so what do? We put a little ground corn and some crabgrass, and whew, we're done. We hit the target. I got to figure out, so exactly what are we managing? And the more I thought about it, is that are we managing the pasture or are we really managing the horses? Or maybe it's a little bit of both. So that's kind of where I'm going to come at it from is, and I'm going to repeat a little bit of what Dr. Teutsch talked about, because that's one of the things they tell us when we teach college students is repetition is good. If you repeat it often enough, there's a slight chance that they will retain it. Not a guarantee, but might happen. So we'll see what we got. Big thing about horses is they are great at picking out what they want to eat. It's kind of like watching people at a buffet. It is no different. Do we always eat all of the things that we're supposed to on the buffet? No. Do we always eat the most nutritious on the buffet? That's debatable. It's a little bit, Dr. Witt was concerned about what's well established. Then I would argue what's nutrition. What's nutritionist or most nutrient dense on the buffet? Well, that would be the desserts. We all need calories. We might not need as many calories as we get, but we need them. So horses are going to go to those areas in the pasture that they like to graze. Why do they go there? I have no idea. They like it there. We had in one of our grazing trials, and you'll get to see her doing her great job as a research animal towards the end of the presentation, but in where she was in the pasture, there was a particular part she liked to stand at. And there was two reasons. It was the highest part, so she got all of the breeze. The biggest part was the teaser stallion was on the other side of the fence. I'm not sure what was going on, but she seemed to like to be up there by him, and he didn't mind being up there by her. So there was 12 feet of fence between the two of them. It was okay. Nothing went on. They are going to have what they prefer to eat. Not only the species, but also within the plant. They are going to, they might, Dr. Teutsch, take that leaf that you said don't bite that off. They might do that because that's what they like. And so what are they going to develop? What we call lawns and roughs. And everybody thinks that the lawns and the roughs are caused by the fecal material. Not the case. Because she's grazing, and you can notice there's a small amount of fecal material there. It's not bothering her at all because there's grass there. She's okay with it. What we found is in watching them is that they would particularly avoid freshly defecated manure, but if it was 3 weeks old after a rotation, didn't bother them at all. They'd eat right over top of it and be happy for it. So I think what happens with the lawns and roughs is it becomes mature and it becomes unpalatable. Is it because maybe there's a little more nutrients caused by the manure or the urine? Potentially, but it's as much their selection as it is anything else. So as Dr. Teutsch mentioned, we graze it to a certain height. That has to be the average. Has to be the average because, they've got lots, and there's a bunch of them, and yes, that's sort of that would be mob grazing, I think. Uh, they were all there because they were getting ready to come into a research project, so we were actually herding them up there. They didn't stay like that all the time, and they were coming off about 100 acres, so they weren't beating it up too bad, and they weren't there for very long. But when you go out here, and it's 2 inches here, and it's 4 inches or 6 inches over here, that's an average of 4 inches if it's 2 and 6. So you can tell them, and maybe your horses are better than our UK research horses, but I could tell her all I wanted to. Go over there and eat that grass because it's the right height. And what's she going to do? She's going to eat this stuff because it's what's palatable. It's just like telling your children, stop, you got to eat the salad first. No, I'm going to the ice cream. That's what they're going to do, and they cause the lawns and the roughs. So typically, you're either going to have to, if you move them, you're going to have to mow it. You have to do something to get it back in balance because it won't do that. And then I would also, if it was me, and I know Dr. Witt doesn't want me to drag that beat up pasture because I'm going to just encourage the weeds, which I get that, but I got to do something to get rid of that manure. I got to break it up because if you don't and it gets hot and dry, you're going to have hot, dry lumps that are going to form a nice crown over top of the grass underneath it, which is then going to die, but it never kills the weeds. I can't figure that out. So I think the gene jockeys out there need to get those weed genes and figure out how they will grow anywhere. So let's go to the next one. But we got to think about that. So what are our challenges? So everybody's got great pastures, right? Of course you don't. That's why we're all here. So what are we going to do? I mean, think about it. So if Dr. Teutsch is giving you some great things, you get up tomorrow morning and you seed crabgrass. It won't come up by tomorrow night, will it? Probably not. We got to get to that 6 to 8 inches, 10 inches. It's got to grow. What are you going to do? I mean, that's a serious consideration. So are you going to do this? Because they're doing a pretty nice job, and any little itty bitty piece of grass that pops up, they are going to consume it. I noticed some horses today when I was driving that there didn't look like there was much grass out there, and boy, they were grazing as hard as they could. I'm pretty sure that if we'd have gone out and checked them, they would have had muddy noses. They were that close to the dirt. Or, yeah, if it's on their nose, it's dirt, but if it wasn't, it would have been soil, right? So, think about that. So, if we don't have any pasture that's available, and I know in talking to some of the agents here, I mean, there's a lot of things over the last 2 years that have caused us to have a concern about what pasture do we have. So we got to figure that out. What do we have available? I'd love to have 2 to 3 acres per horse, or I guess if you live in central Kentucky with the thoroughbred farms, they have 6 to 8 acres per horse. Actually, it's 6 to 8 acres per John Deere, and what's left is for the horses. But we got to figure that out. So I might not have my 2 to 3 acres. I may have some ground, but I don't know what else I'm going to have. And I really want to press the button, but it doesn't want to do that for me. So what can we rescue? What part of our grazing areas can we rescue? We're not going to rescue it all because that would be impractical. We have to figure out what's the best that I can do to have something for this spring. Not only for grazing, but as Dr. Teutsch talked about, we got to protect the soil. We got to do something like that. So we really do have to have a plan. And that means you have to potentially write it down, because if it's just in your head, it's just in your head. It's got to be written down to be a plan so that we know what we're going to do. We got to think about what are we going to use. It would appear that we're going to are limited to maybe some oats, annual rye, and maybe some crabgrass. It's okay, Dr. Witt. Crabgrass is all right. Not as good as Bermuda grass, but weeds are weeds, whatever you're going to do. And I think you told us a weed is only something where it's where you don't want it to be. So if I want it to be there, it's no longer a weed. You learned that here. And then what are our alternatives going to be? What else can we possibly do? So I was sitting there when Dr. Teutsch asked you about the price of hay, and it was like, wow, that's not bad. Grass hay bales are running $16 and up in Lexington. Alfalfa hay bales are well over 20. Now, I did see on Facebook yesterday, you can get some really nice grass hay, and it has to be really nice because it's from Canada, so it's going to be really good. $7.50 a bale, 50-pound bales, but you only have to buy it by the semi-load. 800 bales. So we could all go together and have a co-op, but you think about it, and right now, how easy is it to buy hay? We are in a fairly, I think, the lowest hay inventory that's been for decades, right? So what are you going to be able to buy? If you can buy it, it is going to be expensive. It is going to be the best quality, right? Maybe not. So you think about it, we have the pasture that we would love to have, we don't have it because of the conditions that we're facing. The alternative would be hay, and that's going to be a very tough alternative. I mean, so when you think about the target we're trying to hit, it is pretty mobile, pretty mobile. So we can, and the other thing that, so if we have to wait for the spring oats to grow, we have to wait for the annual ryegrass to grow, we have to wait for the crabgrass to grow, and there's nothing else there, I mean, we are in a tough spot. We are in a really tough spot. So, continue on. So we got to start to think about how we're going to manage our horses. And it sounds that some of you have enough ground for the horses you have, and others sound like you have enough horses and not enough ground. That's not an uncommon scenario. One of our other forage specialists was at a farm outside of Lexington, and he said, "You got to help me." He said, "I don't know what we're going to do with all these horses." I said, "Well, we could maybe introduce them to an auctioneer," but then I realized it was a boarding stable, and it's like, well, we can't do that because they need all those horses to fill the stalls to pay the bills. So it's like, wow. So we know how many horses. Can we do something with their grazing time? Maybe we use Dr. Teutsch's, I don't like sacrifice, but we have to have a hold your horses space. Not sacrifice, we're not doing anything, there's no volcanoes, there's no to the gods, none of that, nope. It's a hold your horses area. So do we have that? Or are our horses going in the barn for a certain period of the day so that we actually get them off the ground? Now that means we're going to have to feed them some other ways, but we need to think about what our grazing time actually is. And so that makes a big difference on that 2 to 3 acres is, do I need that forage produced to significantly impact the nutrient requirements of the horses? And it depends on what percentage that has to be. Yes, we'd like it to be 100% mostly, but maybe we have to think about that. Maybe we got to put horses out and bring them back in. You know, one of the people that we dealt with back in the fall, that was one of the things we talked about is, can you limit how much time they're out there? So that part of that is so they only beat it up to a certain level. So we need to think about that. And I did put sacrifice area on here. I'm going to change that. But, you know, do we have a place where they can go and then make use of some alternative feeds? So while we wouldn't maybe necessarily want to feed a lot of concentrate, maybe there are some of those other feeds that are available that we could make use of and figure out what percentage of their nutrients they require. You will see very often it will be, and we see it in the popular press, a lot of my extension colleagues across the equine world around the U.S. always talk about horses need 2.5% of their body weight in hay every day. It's like, depends on the hay. Because think about it, if the hay was of such quality that it provided the energy they required at 1.75% of body weight, why would I feed 2.5? So one of the things that maybe we look at alternative feeds, maybe we look at how to feed our horses better and feed them what they need, not what they want. I mean, we heard before all of you got here, there was a little bit of a discussion about that as to, how many little Debbies really needed to be consumed to meet a requirement. And we'll leave it at that. You can figure out who was having that discussion. But we need to think about that. I mean, too often it's like, I need to have something. No, you need to not feed them just because they look hungry. Yes, they like to eat 14, 15 hours a day. I get that, but in some cases, they don't need to eat 16, 18, or 20 hours a day. Because then what do we have? Fat horses. What's one of the biggest problems in the horse industry today? Fat horses. Why are they fat horses? It's not because Dr. Teutsch grows really good hay. Well, that's part of it. But it's our fault because we take his really good hay and feed it like it's rice cakes. We need a few more rice cakes, Dr. Teutsch. A few more rice cakes. We'll go to the next one. So we got to think about this. So what are we going to do? What can we do? I don't know. So we can have some rescue seeded areas. But you have to wait. We already talked about it. You have to wait. We had on a pasture that we had done some work, and then they came in and got some nice seedings. It wasn't exactly this one, but it looked like this. We put the horses back out after the grass was getting close to the right level, getting close. And we had one horse, and she just picked a seed row and went right down the row. Turned around, came right back. I mean, they denuded all that brand new seeding. I mean, it is gone. So it might not have been quite as established as Dr. Witt said, because I don't think it took them a lot to pull it out. And they just ate everything. I don't even think they washed the dirt off the roots. They just ate it all. We are going to have to think about how we're adapting to this new feed because it is new feed. It's not like when they adapt to the grasses, it grows normally in the springtime. But when there's a flush and it changes, that is new feed. And they are slightly prone to that. And you might think, well, why do the wild horses never have that problem? Because the wild horses are walking 8 to 10 to 13 miles a day to get enough to eat. So while there's a change, they're moving on. And they're doing some other things, and they are not consuming the seed rows. I mean, there's a lot of grass there to be consumed. And we did tell them to stop. You've had enough. It's like, this is too good. So we might have to limit their access. We might have to go back to that grazing time. When do I put them out? When do I bring them in? There's always that debate. Dr. Teutsch's factory is there producing all of those storage carbohydrates, so we have to worry a little bit about that. And if they're storing it faster than they're using it when they're growing, it's going to be there. But if they grow during the night because it's a nice evening, they're going to use up some of that carbohydrate. So it won't be as big a problem with them. And certainly we have to worry about those horses that have that metabolic condition that Dr. Teutsch talked about. But we're talking less than 10% of the horse population. Not every one of you've got, all your horses are not metabolic. Could they become? Yes. If you let them become obese? Yes. But you can control some of that. Certainly there is some genetic predisposition to being metabolic, and we know that. And some of the breeds that they talk about being more prone than others, it's because they do have a genetic predisposition. I mean, we looked at, I don't know, about 900 horses where we studied their DNA and did all the other stuff. I know I got the body condition score, most of them, and it was like, and body condition scoring horses on poor photographs is really good for your eyesight. No, it's not, but anyway, so we need to think about that. How long is that rescue going to last? So we got annual ryegrass till June. There's the rest of the year, so we got to think about it. We got to plan for that. We have to be excited that we're going to have it right now, but it's not there for the long haul. Are we going to use some hay? So if we're adapting to this new feed, it is not an uncommon thing to feed them some hay before you put them out, so they don't go out hungry. You watch people, I'm not going to eat all day today because it's Thanksgiving and then I'm going to be able to eat more. You can actually eat more if you eat all day long because your stomach stays expanded and you have more capacity. But we want to feed them some hay so they're full, so they're not going out and just dropping their head on that seed row and just going until they are completely full. So that will help for a little bit. Until they figure it out. Horses are fairly smart. I know they do some things that we say, no, that's not a very smart horse. But on this, they are. And if you're bringing them in, getting them off the grass, feeding them some hay, and then turning them out, you will see that they will eat hay before they go out. And when they know that they're going out for the grass, they will stop eating hay. Takes about 4 days. They used to do that with beef cattle. You feed the good hay one day and the not so good hay the next day, and it didn't take the cows very long, or the steers, to figure out, well, I'm not eating this sorry stuff. I get the good stuff tomorrow. And they would actually change their intake levels, and the horses will do that. Putting hay out when they're grazing, once the grass starts to grow, they're going to quit eating it. Don't waste your hay. You're going to do, unless you're putting in a feeder, you're doing two things. You're wasting the hay, and you're killing the grass that's underneath it. We might come back to it, but we'll go to the next one because, this is B&B hay. Stands for bed and breakfast. They'll go back over here, but I'm a big fan of rotational grazing. A big fan, except for the fact that it takes a lot of time and it costs money. And it does take a lot of time. If you're going to do it so that it really, really works, you have to spend some time. So that means, and I found it really easy in one of our grazing studies, that we check the horses in the pasture every day. But to be completely transparent, my graduate student did it for 5 days of the week. I did it for 2. Thought that was a good balance. I got Saturday and Sunday, so because I always used to get, when the people would go to the faculty club at Spindletop and they would be worried about I'd have a horse laying out on the pasture. I can't tell him how many Sundays I got a phone call from the dean. Do you have a dead horse out there? It's like, no, her name's Peanut and she's sleeping. She is not dead. But because we would do what Dr. Teutsch said, we moved it when the grass said it was time to move. And it could be 7 days, it could be 9 days, it could be 5 days. It depended on whether it rained. And we had a fair bit of grazing pressure. Dr. Teutsch, you could probably calculate it faster than I can, but I had 1.25 acres were my paddock sizes, and I had 14 horses. So 14. Never fed them anything. I had grass at the start, I had grass at the end. But I had a single grass species. It was a weed. It was Bermuda grass. And I'm glad we didn't have to pay the nitrogen bill that we would have to pay today. But they grazed it pretty hard. And they grazed it fairly evenly. And then we would move them. But we walked it every day. And it was like, we got to move them. And it didn't matter if it was Sunday. If they had to move, they had to move. So not one issue of colic. Did I have a couple of fat horses? Yes, I did. I actually had one horse that they always told us at the farm, she would end up the grazing season about a body condition score 4. She ended up on the Bermuda grass a body condition score of 6. She did really well. The Bermuda grass colic issue is with hay. And I'm not sure, I'm not quite ready to blame Bermuda grass as the only culprit with that deal. Because if you live in an area where 95% of the horses get Bermuda grass hay and nothing else for hay, what's the chances of one of those 95% getting colic? It's going to happen. So could it cause some issues? Yes. I think you got to make sure that you make really good hay and go on. I'm not a big fan. Once we start to get some grass, feeding hay on pasture, I think you're wasting a lot of resources. So next one. So what are we going to have? So this is a terrible way to feed hay. I actually calculated in this pasture, and we were losing about almost 10% of the grazing area because we were killing it with the hay. And it could have been worse, except for the people feeding the hay could only throw it so far. You can laugh, it's true. I mean, it's really good. You want to hire people that are only 5'7", because they're not so tall that they can get that far over the fence. And I had somebody tell me, and Dr. Torch will appreciate this, that you should feed really mature hay that has a lot of seed heads, because then the seeds will reseed the dead spots. Those people also sell bridges. They own the one in Alaska, the bridge to nowhere. Let's not be doing this, folks. If we're going to feed hay, go buy yourself a hay feeder. And if I saw one thing that really surprised me, pleasantly surprised me on my drive out here, was the number of hay feeders I saw along the highway. And a lot of them looked like they were do-it-yourself. They had nice roofs on them. I mean, they were great hay feeders. And it didn't matter. There were some with horses eating out of them, and there were some that had cows eating out of them. I was really impressed. So I kind of like that. But, we've got to think about some of those things, and I don't think I put it on this, but, what other things are we going to feed? And when we're feeding those, we need to take into account that they are providing a percentage of the nutrients. So we want to make sure that we're not doubling up, because that's not going to do us any good. Do we want to feed some concentrate? We might feed a small amount. The other thing that I think with all of these is we need to be concerned, certainly with those spring oats, some of that carbohydrate issue, and I'm not so worried as much about the metabolic horses, but I'm worried about horses in pasture laminitis. Laminitis is probably one of the biggest health concerns in the horse industry, if not the biggest one. More detrimental to horses than anything else that we have. Over 50% of the laminitis cases that are typically seen in the horse industry are results of overgrazing lush pasture. About 40%, or I think it's 8 to 10% are from some of the other issues related to that, and then there's all the other kinds of founder that we can have, the road founder and all that other stuff. But not adapting the horses to the pasture, or getting them out there when it is lush, when it's too good for them. We need to think about this. I also really think that I hope that this issue is going to go away, but it's not. It's not. We're going to have to deal with these kind of conditions again. So we plan for this year. So Dr. Teutsch gave us some things that we can do in the near term, but we still got to figure out what we're going to do for the long term. his spring oats and annual ryegrass, that's going to get us to July, maybe August, if we're lucky. Well, what about next year? So when are we going to fix and truly renovate and plant when we're supposed to? When are we, how are we going to plan for that? And I really think that it doesn't probably feel like an opportunity, but it could be. How are we going to manage our pastures? Is it better to have that one great big one? Or is it better to think about how we want to structure them? So his diagram of that grazing plan, I mean, there's a million ways you can do that. But the biggest thing that when you want to have it so that it's flexible is, where's the water source? How do they get to water? That would be my first, second, and probably third. It's kind of like real estate. What am I worrying about for my pasture program? Water, water, and water. After that, would I like them to have shelter? Yeah, maybe. Are they going to use it? Probably not. You can build the fanciest run-in sheds and they're just going to turn tail and go stand in the rain. Why? Because they are horses. And I think deep down they know they are annoying the tar out of you. I actually had a lady that said, my horse will only go in the run-in shed. And she said, I actually work 2 extra jobs to pay for that doggone thing. She'll only go in if I sit in the lawn chair up there with her. They will train you to do some weird things. But I think it is really a good time to, how do I lay this out? How do I have where my water source is? Where will my hold your horses lot be? Where can I get them off the ground? I know people that use their outdoor arenas as their hold their horses area, because it is. I know a couple of people that are using their indoor arena, and I guess they've been using it to get them out of the mud for this winter, because I've seen pictures of it and it is a hot mess. I'm not cleaning that thing up, I'll tell you. But think about it. I mean, we're going to put some seed down. I know there's a lot of people put seed down last fall with best intentions. Didn't come up because it didn't rain. And when Dr. Witt teaches us how to control the weather, it'll be good. It'll be good. So I think we might be just about done. One more. See, that is a hard-working pasture research horse. And I promise you, she probably was eating. She didn't mind laying down to eat. But you look at that and it's like, there's a ton of grass there. Way more, 2.5 acres, 2 horses. And I followed the rules, Dr. Teutsch. 10 inches, 4 inches, mowed it to 4 inches, moved them, 2 weeks on, 4 weeks off. Worked perfect. Should have written it up as a research paper and quit. So the next year was 2007. June worked really well. Then it stopped raining. But I was one of those people, it's like I'd look at the forecast. 30% chance of rain. I now have looked at it in a different way. 70% chance it's not going to rain. So our sacrifice area was one of the 3 paddocks. And I thought, I'm just going to beat one up. I beat up the one closest to the gate, so it was easiest to feed hay, and it was easiest to get the tractor in when we had to reseed. So it would be nice to have one. It also had a high traffic pad in it with a feeding station on it, so that even made more sense. But you just have to think about that. And I have more people that say, well, I don't need to worry about this. Look at all the grass. They are never going to eat this. We all know that. Not in a million years. My cousin showed me his pasture that looked like this, and he said, so what do I need to do to get the horses to eat this? He said, mow it. Not sure that he really trusted his cousin from Kentucky. Even though I'm not from Kentucky, but I was from Kentucky that day, And it's like, no, you don't do it. I said, that's what you're going to have to do because they will not eat it. Promise you. And they aren't going to do it with this. So I would think that if the horse is laying down and you can see it, it's time to move them. Because I'll guarantee you that she weighs 1,600 pounds. That grass is not going to stand up for a long time. But the other thing about rotational grazing in horses that's really fun is they will learn when it's time to move. Do one little thing. So with this group of horses, these two horses, I moved the salt block. And they would go to the gate. Second move, they would go to the gate. She would actually trot. She never trotted anywhere. But she would trot and stand at the gate. She got a little concerned the one day because she was out and the grass was a little wet. She slid into the electric fence. So getting her through the gate was just a little challenging. We had to make it really wide. But so I love this. And Dr. Teutsch brought one of my favorite kinds. This is, if you come up and look at this is the right size of tape. That's what that is. It's just a 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch. I don't like the 1 1/4 because it's too hard to work with. And I prefer these kind if I was going to use one because you can put anything through this thing. Whereas these, unless you buy the ones like Dr. Teutsch has here, which are quite a bit more money than what the extension horse specialists can afford, these will break off. If you're not careful, these will break off. And as you all know, these get old, right? These get old. There is one really good one like this, and it looks like a stirrup right over top of this. So when you're not stepping on the side, you're stepping right over the stick or the stake. And in some parts of Kentucky, that's what you need to be able to get this thing in the ground. So, and there's the other ones that are they're gray fiberglass that have these clips on them. Whoop, these clips on them. Don't buy them. Don't buy them. And I got that straight from the young man that was selling them to me at Tractor Supply. He said, you won't like them because you just won't like them. I said, I need them for a research project. He said, oh, you just don't buy them. Go buy the other ones. And it's like, your manager's going to be really impressed that you just talked somebody out of a sale. But anyway, so there we have it. We got lots of challenges. We got some things we can do. But the biggest thing is we got to have a plan. And I think the plan needs to be long range. We're going to have some short-term goals. I mean, it sounds like we're doing some kind of a business plan here, but we have some short-term goals to get things going now. We have some short-term goals to get rid of the weeds because we know they're coming. If they're not coming, right, Dr. Witt, they're already here. They're already here. So let's deal with them. Let's put some things in the ground that are going to protect our ground and give us something to feed our horses with, and then plan to how we want to resurrect the rest of our pastures. I mean, there's lots of stuff out there to do it. It's not that hard. It just takes a lot of work and money. So there we go. And again, thank you to the agents sitting in the back of the room for all of their efforts to let us be here tonight. And I'm looking forward to the Bermuda Grass Field Day. I will be there, except if I'm somewhere else. So there we have it, gentlemen in the back. Any questions, any comments? Are you ready to go home? There's some little Debbies still out there. All right.
I'll just mention one thing before